All right, so I wanted to welcome you today. My name is Michael Tannenhouse. I'm with Mavenspire. Uh, this month's virtual event, as you know, is on cybersecurity. Mavenspire is on a mission this year to educate and innovate, and I hope the monthly virtual series has helped you solve some real-world problems for your own organizations. So far this year, we've covered topics like using Microsoft Copilot and preparing for Microsoft Copilot, understanding some of the changes in CSF and NIST, writing a usable incident response plan. The usable is the key word there. And today we're going to try something completely new. We wanted to give you a first-person view of what cyber attacks look like. So think of this like a horror movie, but you get to be Freddy. I have two asks for you today. Please give us feedback. We need it. It helps us get better. We just love it. And then the second thing I would ask is we have some amazing virtual events coming over the next 60 days. Please check them out. We have the Cyber Quiz Show. We have a session on MITRE ATT&CK and how to use it to evaluate and augment your current cyber effectiveness. And as always, Mavenspire thrives on overcoming challenges. It's what we do. We welcome the opportunity to help. So with that intro done, I turn this over to my colleagues from Ingram-Micro Center of Excellence. Weir, you want to take it?
Absolutely. So it's a pleasure to be in front of you all today. And it's also a pleasure to be doing a session like this because this is the fun stuff. This is where the job gets good. Anyway, we've got three of us here today. We've got me, Michael Weir, and Rick Crawford. We're both Senior Technical Enablement Engineers in Ingram-Micro Cybersecurity Center of Excellence. And oh no, I'm sorry, me and Rick and Mitch is the architect one. We all work together. Sometimes I forget the titles that we have. Either way, we're all here for you. This is going to be mostly hacking, but we do want to set the stage a little bit. We're going to give you the topology of what we're doing and a quick look at how it actually plays into the MITRE ATT&CK framework. Then you're going to watch me do the thing, the live attack demonstration. We're going to have something about dependence in depth, just how to actually solve for a problem, because we don't just give you a problem and fear. And then, of course, a conclusion at the end. Starting with the setting up what's going to happen. So this is going to be an attack based on identity, and I'm going to show how you can use identity to break into an environment without actually knowing a password to get in. Because we think of phishing, we think credentials being stolen, all that kind of thing. That's only one aspect of messing with identity. Before we go into this, we're going to assume that I, as a bad actor, have done a couple of things already. So first, I've chosen my target organization. I've scouted it for easy targets, vulnerable users, people whose information is sprayed all over the internet, somebody who's really giving away their personal life on LinkedIn, that kind of thing. I'm finding somebody who I think is a soft target who's likely to fall for the scam I'm running. And the goals that we're going to be doing this is we're going to get a quiet admin account and we're going to leave it open for future access. So I want to set this environment up in such a way that I can come back whenever I want to come back and do whatever I want to do in a way that's least likely to get detected as possible. We're only actually going to be working with a couple of machines today. This is a micro environment. There's nothing running in it that isn't needed for the demonstration that we're doing. So we have our victim there, who is going to be me putting on my not so smart user hat. We have an AD server, and then we have me, the bad actor, going in. So normally the blue arrows are normal and the red arrows are what I'm going to do. So I'm going to take control of the victim and use that to get to the AD server, abuse credentials there. And then, like I said, I've left myself a backdoor to go through. At this point, I'm going to pass it to Mitch because Mitch is going to give you a very short, and I'm going to prod him in the background if he starts going too long, overview of like the official wording of what I just said.
Yeah, so if you there's a lot of stuff on this slide, and I'm not going to go into all the nitty-gritty details, but we just kind of wanted to walk through what we're going to be doing. So then when we look at us actually doing it, we have a little bit of context there, right? And Mike had kind of gone through a little bit of the actual environment. What this is a flow chart of pretty much the entire attack chain. And it's linked up to something called the MITRE ATT&CK framework, if anyone's familiar with that. Basically, what it is it's a framework of the tactics and the techniques that threat actors take. So really, like, what are the behaviors that they're doing? We have a lot of frameworks, a lot on the defense side on like how, what kind of tools and technologies do we have in place? What kind of holes or vulnerabilities can we plug? This is really looking at, well, what are the threat actors? What are the bad guys actually doing? And so if you're interested, you can look up, we did put the tactic and technique IDs in there. I think it's really cool. They laid on a matrix, but we won't dive into the matrix and all that kind of stuff. But what Mike's going to be doing here is first, we're going to need to get initial access, right? So he's going to create a malicious file. That's a Word document. We're going to send that as a spear phishing attachment in an email. And that'll land us on that Windows endpoint where they'll open up the that file, exploit a vulnerability there, and get us a reverse shell, which basically means, hey, we have control of this computer. Mike's going to do some discovery. Hey, what user is this? What other devices are out there? We're going to spot probably an AD server there. We're going to exploit a vulnerability to escalate our privileges on the system by modifying some registry keys, dump the password hashes. We're going to crack that hash. We're going to get into the Active Directory, so lateral movement from that Windows endpoint to the domain controller, and then manipulate an account so that we have a new administrator backdoor account that'll allow us to pretty much own the domain, but also have a way in for us to have additional impact, whether we're exfiltrating data or having other impact on the system. And so the one thing, as Mike's kind of walking through actually doing this attack, that I want you to kind of keep in mind is there's a lot of steps here, right? It's not just one step and we're exploiting one vulnerability. This is really an attack chain. And so as we kind of go through this, I think it's kind of cool to ask yourself, if this specific behavior happened, would we know about it, and would we be able to prevent it from happening? And there's a lot of different points within this attack chain that we could alert on it and have visibility, as well as kind of stop that action as well. So that's kind of what we'll be going through. I want to give you a little context before we actually go and do it. But with that, Mike, should we hop into it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to unshare and reshare for just a sec so that we have fresh screens up here. Since I am playing the kind of like I'm playing the useful idiot and the bad guy here. I've got a ton of different screens open, so I will periodically be stopping sharing to switch which screen I'm sharing from. Either way, so we're going to start off being in the driver's seat of my Kali machine. Now, all the tools I'm going to be using are free and readily available. I didn't write anything custom. I'm not doing anything that's like some super secret technique that's not described out there. All I'm doing is common things. So we're saying I've scouted this organization. You're going to find as we go through this, all the names in this organization are related to Charlie Brown, Peanuts in some way. So starting out, I have selected that my target is going to be Charlie Brown. And I've determined that Charlie Brown is the type of person who is probably going to click on my exploits that I send to him. So first thing we got to do, we're going to open up something called a Metasploit framework. This is just a way to make hacking easier for everyone. It is a compilation of verified working hacks that can be called up on command without having to write all the script yourself. You can just do containers and payloads and that kind of thing. Actually, I'm going to take away my face too because you're staring at me in profile this whole time. I will say we operate without a safety net here. I don't have like there's no second string if the stuff goes down. I also didn't video pre-record anything if anything happens. So there are going to be times, specifically when I do the SUI hijack there, where I might have to do the same thing a couple of times simply because I'm running a lot of processes on the endpoint. It's going to start to slow down. If it does fail, it'll be hilarious for you guys. Anyway, so the exploit I'm crafting, I'm typing into the wrong window. The exploit I'm crafting here, well, I shouldn't say crafting, I'm putting together here is one that exploits a vulnerability in how older version of Windows open files. And when I do it, what I'm going to do is open a PowerShell back to myself through a reverse proxy when Charlie opens this file. So that's easy enough to pull up the payload right there. It's built the payload for me. There are of course some options I can do in here. Most of these aren't particularly consequential to what the effect will be visually from what you're watching me do today. They're consequential if you're, say, working from behind NAGs. We're assuming I got access to the environment, probably from parking my car in the parking lot using the Wi-Fi, maybe from using one of the multitude of VPN vulnerabilities that are out there from every vendor right now. I've some way gotten into the environment, but this is where I could do things related to changing addressing to get around NAT and that kind of thing. The only thing we're going to do is we're going to try to name this file something that we think Charlie would open. So we'll just call it April 26th. With that, if I hit exploit, it automatically compiles it. It's taking the code that's in the background, it's putting together a file. You can see where it's put together the file. Actually, you know what? That's probably better. You can see where it's stored the file right here. And I've got a server listening for it. So now it is time to mess with Chuck. As whichever one it was that used to pull the football. Here's Charlie Brown. Now this is an internal mail server that we punched a little bit of holes in to make me able to do this. And these holes are actually somewhat realistic. I might have had to do more reconnaissance to find them. But I know from my reconnaissance that if I write the word banana in here, it was going to bypass the mail filter. I also presume I'd make my name something better than bad actor. If you've seen some of the new Muppet movies, there's a guy whose last name is Bad Guy. It's about as obvious as that. Actually, you know what? Let's do this. Second try. Because this way he thinks there's a first try. Here's my second try at telling you the numbers from today. Peppermint. Now I just navigate to where I've got my file here. I've got April 26th. As you can see, I practiced yesterday. That is attached. And now we are sending it off to Charlie Brown. At this point, all my Kali machine is doing here is listening. It's not, as the attack comes over to Charlie Brown, it's nothing, there's nothing fancy going on. All right, so here I'll show you the other window. Now I'm going to say right off that when we go to open this file, we don't have a registered version of Microsoft Word, so I'm gonna have to click a couple of things for it to work. Anyway, downloading my file. Okay, everything seems kosher. It must just be today's file. Mr. Badaktor must have just screwed something up on the first try. Opening it. And this is where I said the fact that it's not activated, we have to click some buttons. There we go. So now I see a document with a square. Now I'm thinking, oh, maybe this just didn't work or something like that. Who knows? I'm going to take and move back to my bad actor machine now. In my bad actor machine, I can see that I just got a session. I just got a callback from Charlie Brown when that file opened. Now that I have that session, I can do stuff with it. This is where the excitement starts. There we go. So if we just look at sessions, normally if I was a hacker, I'd be doing this to multiple people at once, not just Charlie. So when I looked at my sessions, there'd be a whole bunch of sessions here. In this case, there's just Charlie. So we are going to make this session interactive. When I make it interactive, this is when the shell gets up. When I type the command properly with the plural, even though I'm just starting one, there we go. So now I am inside of Charlie Brown's computer. Let's just open CMD. All right. Let's see here. First, we'll just do, even though I kind of already know this from the session up there, I'm just going to do a quick who am I. Okay, I am super demo domain. My name is Charlie. So, okay, I'm centrally managed. This is in a local account. Let's find out where it's centrally managed from. If I type in this, I go log on server. Now I know where the directory information is coming from. Okay, it's coming from HQ 2016, but that doesn't mean a lot to me. I want to know what the IP address of that thing actually is. Doesn't it seem dumb that you can literally just do these functions? That like, I can just pull up where the logon server is, you know, these are things that really feel like they should be harder than they are, but they're not. They're relatively simple. Okay, so now I have three things in my reconnaissance. I have who my user is, I have where the directory server is, and I've taken that directory server and resolved that host name to an IP address. So I've got what I need from this stage. First stage of hack successful. I'm going to do background. Background just throws this in the background. Now there are a couple other things I could have done here that I'm not going to go through and do. Oh, right, I got to exit the PowerShell. background. Now, just a proof of how well this is going, this is Charlie's screen right here. Nothing new has happened. Charlie could be going on if I had actually allotted enough resources to this VM. Charlie could be going on here and with the rest of his day and not know anything. He could even close this Word document because I'm running in PowerShell. There's this thing you can do when you're initially in the laptop, desktop, what have you, where you can pull up a list of the running processes. And there's a command in the interpreter called migrate. And what that'll do is it's a very basic evasion, but I'm running in PowerShell right now. If somebody looks at the running processes or maybe set a flag on Charlie's computer, they can say, wait, PowerShell is not supposed to be running. So I could say, as soon as I got the session up, I could say migrate to Chrome or something like that, or migrate to some other application. Nothing would change on my side. The only thing, Charlie wouldn't see any changes either. The only thing would happen because I'm running in something different. So if somebody starts to try to do an incident response and they aren't looking deep enough at what's going on in the system, looking at the actions, looking at memory, that kind of thing is basically where we're moving. When they come and say, oh, malicious Word doc was open, PowerShell was open, okay, I'm going to close the Word doc, close the PowerShell, we're all good. That's not actually the case, because at that point, I'm inside Chrome, and I can hop around a lot if I want. I can set multiple chain hops together. And that's just the most basic way of evading. There's plenty of more complicated ways than that. But so I figure at this point, I've pretty much got ownership of Charlie's device. However, I can't get the information I want out of it yet, because if I were to say, there's this command in interpreter that I'm not going to do, it's get system, and it means that you try to become an admin in the system. Now, if I were to do that with just the first hack I've done here, it would say I didn't have sufficient privileges to get system. It would say I don't have sufficient privileges to get into the services. It doesn't have, it's going to block me out of stuff because this computer is at least a little bit logically set up. But the good news for me is there's ways around that. So we're going to use yet another exploit. I could type in the right window too. Use exploit. Now this one I was very surprised. It doesn't have a CVE, and I don't know why that is. But it's a way to bypass user account control using a trusted exe that launches at different points when you're operating different programs inside a laptop. So it's something that automatically launches as a service in the background. It's not going to say anything to Charlie. Now, this is one that, due to the nature of our VMs, takes a little bit to open up. I've got to set a couple of different variables in it. So now, if you remember, I had a session from earlier that I put in the background. So now I'm going to call that session. The reason I put it in the background instead of terminating it is I want to use that session. I want to send this exploit over session 1. Another little detail, I'm already setting up, my other session is over port 4444 already, so we'll do this one over 4440. Really doesn't matter. Theoretically speaking, there could be a firewall or something else in the middle listening for traffic on non-standard ports. All that would require me to do is just choose a standard port. Really, with the amount of sloppiness people do in port forwarding, that's not a hard thing to do through a firewall. Inside a network, very rarely do people have any kind of internal segmentation. It would be meaningful in such a way to stop me from doing what I just did. All right,
Mike,
now
I'm
we're
going
gonna
to stop you real quick.
Yeah.
David in the chat asks, can Charlie do anything at this point to stop you? What's the easiest thing for him to do? Turn off his machine, etc. What are your thoughts on that?
So assuming Charlie knew, and this is Charlie's screen, the only reason it says use exploit there is I was typing in the wrong screen. So Charlie doesn't know any exploits going on. The only ways for Charlie to stop this would be to disconnect his machine from the network. So then there was no longer any connection to me, or shut his machine down. Now, there are things that a bad actor could do to mitigate the ability to shut the machine down, but they would become much more obvious, they become noisy. So Charlie would know something's going on. But at this point, I'm not actually running in this Word thing, so I could just close it. I know from experience, if I close it, there's a chance this VM is going to run out of memory, so I'm not going to do that. But this file doesn't work. Oh, well, whatever, exit out. It doesn't matter at that point. And as I said, the only thing Charlie could even potentially notice from what's going on right now is that his machine's going to run a little slower because there's extra stuff going on. But yeah, the only ways for Charlie to stop me at this point would be to disconnect from the network or turn the machine off. Really, the most foolproof way is to unplug the network cable, because then there's literally physically no way to get there. There
And
is, oh god.
No, keep going. I was just saying I've got a couple more questions before.
No, go on to the next one. I could ramble a lot on that. Let's go to the next one.
William's saying bypass UAC is a feature, not a vulnerability. I think that's in reference to there not being a CVE. And I think that's right.
I suppose.
Yeah, so there are some configuration issues that have CVEs, but yeah. And then Jordan asked, would the session reestablish when the computer comes back online?
That depends on the settings. So if this computer drops just the way I have it configured right now, someone would have to try to relaunch the same Word document to reestablish the session. There's a little exception to that, which is that if the session terminates, but the laptop hasn't been restarted or anything like that, it'll keep trying to reconnect until it's not in memory for whatever reason throws it out of memory. But Charlie's computer will continuously try to reconnect until, like I said, either it's shut down or it crashes out from processes piling on top of processes in the memory. And I'll get an alert on my screen if it does that. It'll just say session 1 terminated, and then it'll say session 2 up and give me all information it gave me before for the session.
And then, all right, we got another question real quick. Michael asked, would a proper EDR solution pick up the lateral movement or the processes running in the background?
So a proper EDR system depends on which one you're using. So there's some EDR systems that sit on the kernel and look for kernel launch processes, or in the kernel look for kernel launch processes. So other that use things like kernel hooks and decoys. I call those like EDR 1.0, and then the ones that are actually watching for kernel processes or EDR 2.0. This is a little bit harder to see because while the PowerShell would be a process starting, depending on your settings, it might not be malicious, because that's the thing about EDR. They're like SIM. You got to tune it. You got to tune out the noise to get information you want. If it was a properly tuned thing, and it could say, hey, this is probably what it would see actually. No, Word isn't supposed to launch PowerShell. In this case, Word is launching PowerShell, terminate process. Because the kernel sees that the session's being created like that, or a connection app, whatever you want to call it. It knows that, app A isn't supposed to launch app B. There are some exploits, none of the ones I'm using here today, because honestly, I'm not good enough to use them. There are some exploits that can operate entirely in the memory and entirely through changing things inside a certain app. So it wouldn't be Word launching PowerShell. It would be abusing the ability of Word to write to certain points in the memory. If you really want to go crazy, there's been thefts of. You remember Pirate Bay? The guy that ran Pirate Bay, the way he was caught was they actually grabbed his laptop, which was using Tails, which is a 3-year-old operating system. They took it and they threw it in liquid nitrogen so that charge in the RAM didn't decay. And then they went and plugged the RAM in and pulled an image of the RAM off like that. You can do little tricks because of just plain the nature of computers, that just because we kill something doesn't mean it immediately dies in the background. So you can hang out in the memory for a little bit and do other things. And, when it's shut off, though, it's shut off.
It's all in the memory.
And I don't have a good one. I've had a lot of concussions. Anyway.
Comment from another Michael. Well, that's another good reason to reboot a computer once every day or so.
Yeah. It's worth noting, though, when Windows, if you use shutdown writes a bunch of memory to the disk, because people always got mad that their Windows computers took a long time to boot up. So unless settings have been changed by an administrator, I don't even know what settings, when you do shutdown, it'll write some of the memory to the hard drive, so then it can start up faster. Next time you come back from shutdown, you've got to do restart. Ironically, is the only thing that actually totally shuts it down. And that's because we all complain about how long shutdowns were taking.
All right, I think we're good for now.
All right, cool. So I've got this exploit ready to go. I'm gonna run it. I just typed that on Charlie's screen again. I'm gonna run it. Man, I'm a noisy hacker. Commands keep popping up in that Word thing. All right, let's see. All right, we're staging. That means we got a successful hold. It's spending some time in the background considering its life choices. For those that want to see, all Charlie sees still is me accidentally typing in here because I'm a horrible hacker and I'm alerting the entirety of everything to my presence. Now, there we go. Now I've got session 2. So I've got one session that's going to keep things initially open. That was the Office Word HTA exploit there, the CV0199. That I have that exploit running, and now I actually have a second foothold into the device. My second foothold is the UAC bypass I just did here. So now I want to try to get system admin privileges. So I'm just going to say get system. Oh man, I typed it in. Oh man, Charlie Brown's seeing a lot of action over there. He's got to know something's going on. Get system. There we go. Now I know that we're in the memory here. So I'm an administrator now, and I want to get the administrator's password. So I'm going to do a hash dump. So my hash dump up here, it gave me this. It says there's a username administrator, and here's the hash of the password. Now we're going to do a little bit of the Food Network thing here, where they say, oh, you know, we're going to put the cake in the oven, and it's going to go in there for an hour, and suddenly they pull out a finished cake in like 10 seconds because they already baked it in the background. I already ran in the background to decrypt this because I know what it is. There's a couple of programs you could do to try to decrypt it if you didn't otherwise know. So there's this thing called Burp Suite. Burp Suite is a simple pack-in. I'm actually going to show it since I have it on here. Burp Suite is cool because it does a lot and it's very visual. It's not a high complexity thing. Free, like everything else. It is working hard on opening. It can be used for DDoS, or I'm sorry, it can be used for DOS attacks. It can be used for password spraying, rainbow dictionary attacks, all that kind of thing. And it has its own built-in browser. So let's say I have a target. My target's a web server. I'm going to open this nice little browser. And we're going to go to the overall homepage of what we're using right now. That's because that's not the actual address. All right, so now I've gotten to this. I'm going to say this is XXX is going to try to log in from AAA. Invalid. Okay, so obviously I didn't have the right credentials there. However, I did this. You'll notice I got some stuff. So I got a bunch of gets, bunch of gets, bunch of gets. And here's my post. Okay. So here's the username and password. I'm going to take my little username here. What am I doing wrong? Oh yeah, right. We're going to send this to intruder. I found that what I want is in this request, and I've sent it to intruder. Going to intruder, I'm going to say, okay, here's my username. Mark that as interesting. Here's my password. Mark that as interesting. And I can just spray things out there. I can say we're going to take payload 1, have this be a bunch of usernames. And we're going to take payload 2. We're going to have this be a bunch of passwords. I can just try to brute force things. If I hit start attack, it's just going to go to this page I already set up to go to with this, and it's just going to change what's filled into those 2 blanks. So that's one way of doing it. Another way of doing it is there's this thing called John the Ripper. What John the Ripper does is take a word list that you give it. There's small ones. There's one for John. There's one called Fast Track. There's longer ones that have names like rocku.txt is the longest. The full version has 8.4 billion stolen passwords in it. That's equivalent to 7. Every alphanumeric password combination is 7 digits or smaller. But it's even better because it's stolen things. So it's themed as to this is what humans excuse me, this is what humans have used as their passwords. So if we want to go to, we'll just launch a new one.
Hey, Mike, real quick, before we move on to that next step,
Yeah.
John had a good question. The admin escalation is kind of key. Can you hear more about that? So we pretty quickly ran get system, and it just kind of worked. Could you give a little more context on how we actually achieved the escalation there?
It's a very good question. I've never thought about what goes on behind that. That seems like a very obvious thing that I've done now. So basically, a bunch of stuff is stored on any given device, and there's links. There's links back to the AD server from that given device. You know what, Mitch? You better take this one.
Yeah. So Yeah, basically inside of Metasploit, there's a neat little command called get system that tries a bunch of stuff. And if are you able to go back to that shell where we had run that, Mike?
Yeah. Oh, that's
With
right. It gives the list, the call
Yeah,
stack.
so it'll try a bunch of things. There's about, I don't know, 6 or so techniques. I believe it probably worked on technique 1, which is called named pipe impersonation, which is basically where they're impersonating an actual pipe or the system client. I don't know all the nitty-gritty details, but I think what's interesting is get system is usually the first thing folks will try, especially if they're using the interpreter, the Metasploit framework. It's like, hey, here are the 6 things that often we can just elevate locally to system on that device. There was named pipe impersonation that we used, but those are probably, those are some of the key things where there's typical stuff folks will try. You hop on a system. Well, we need the system privileges, and there's common things that often you can elevate it to. But we can send some more information too on which one we worked.
Yeah, now it's funny because I never thought about that before. You ever you don't stop and think about how your circulatory system works? Like I never stopped and thought about how get system works because you just type it in and it works.
Just works.
Yeah, just works. It's like my circulatory system just works. Anyway, quick view of John. This won't take long. So it's a program called John the Ripper. And I'm not even going to show. Basically, I would put it in, and the command I would do would sit there, and it would take all the passwords in my list here. Admin hash is what I just downloaded from my my other shell, and that long, scary-looking, complicated-looking hash here. That's run through a bunch of math that makes it so that I can't understand what's going on just by looking at it. But it'll take the list of passwords and it'll hash each of the passwords with the algorithm that I believe is SMB. It's being used there. It'll hash the password, or is it next? Yeah, whatever. And see, it'll hash the password from the list, and then it'll compare it to the hash that I stole here and see if it matches. So it's much more accurate than a brute force attack because it's not trying to guess the password. It's trying to see if it has a password that matches the password that is here. Anyway, so now I have gotten the hash. We're going to assume that what's happened is that I have decrypted a hash with John, which if we had a while to sit around, because it's not fast to hash that many passwords, we could sit around here and do that. But we're just going to pretend that I've gotten my objective now. I have my admin password. Now there's a problem with what I'm doing in my environment, and that is that if I start doing everything with an admin password, like a known administrator password, chances are if they have an EDR, they have an XDR, or even if they just have a SIM or simple alerting, if administrator suddenly starts logging in from tons of weird places, that's noisy. People are waiting to see if an administrator account is compromised. So we don't want to do that. I'm going to go to the AD server and put in the password I stole. So I'm not going to tell you what it is because it's our actual password. Now I'm in their AD server, conveniently left open to just the window that I wanted to go to. And see, we got Charlie Brown, Peppermint Patty, and Pigpen. Well, Charlie Brown is noisy because he's the laptop I've initially compromised here. If they run back and do forensics, they're going to realize, hey, wait a second, Charlie's the one that's been hit. So I could take another user. In this case, we'll use Peppermint Patty as an example. I could, since I'm logged into administrator, go in and say, all right, she's a member of domain users and remote desktop users. Let's make her an admin too. And just like that, I now have an account that's an admin account that if I had credentials for or something like that, I could go back in and I could use her as the admin account, because chances are they're not tracking Peppermint Patty's account as closely as they are tracking the administrator account. Or if I wanted to be even more devious, I could also go in here and reset Peppermint Patty's password, but that's if I want to do things really in the short term. Because if Peppermint Patty tries to log in and it says that her password is wrong enough time, she's going to call tech support and say, hey, there's something wrong with my password. That's another noisy thing, because I was like, oh, man, why did her password change? Did she just get her password wrong? There's going to be a thought that there was an event here. So instead, I'm going to take their probably very well-known schema, and I'm going to say that we're going to make Snoopy, who I've always assumed Snoopy's last name was Brown because of Charlie Brown. And we're going to follow everything else. First name in lowercase, like we had Charlie and we saw Peppermint. We're going to follow everything the same. Going to make Snoopy. I'm going to make his password something that I know. Don't want to change it next login because, you know, it's me. I don't want to change it. But I do want to make sure it never expires, because I don't want to have to get password rotation emails. I'm pretty sure I typed this one wrong. Handy, right? User cannot change the password. So if anybody tries to come in as Snoopy, I have the password. The password can't be changed except by another administrator of the server. And it's never going to expire. So when the server automatically hits password rotation time, I'm automatically exempted from that. So now we've created Snoopy. Snoopy's created as a domain user. So we are just going to look at his properties, and we're going to make him a member of admin users as well. Administrators. There we go. Gonna apply that. I want to, maybe we'll let him to remote users too. I forget exactly how I did this part. Yeah, we'll make him a remote desktop and a remote management user too. So now I've given Snoopy, my fake account, privileges to everything. And now presumably if this were a real enterprise, there'd be hundreds of people here. It wouldn't just be these four, because if I have 3 and another one appears, it's pretty easy to note something went wrong. But if I've got 100 people in here and a new one appears, and I'm an admin, it just spends a little bit of time working on an AD a week. I'm not constantly watching it for account changes or something like that. I'm relying on notifications to get me through a day. Probably some employees that left are still in there. And that's actually a cool thing I could do. If I was using this and there's an employee that had been fired but was never pulled out of the AD, I could make their account my account. Then even the count of even the count of usernames in there wouldn't be wrong. You say, well, how do you know if somebody just left? LinkedIn. LinkedIn's a great resource for stuff like that. Let's say I have somebody's username and password and I want to get into the environment, and they say they're going on vacation. I say, wow, that means they're going to be using their VPN. And that means they're probably going to have to connect in, putting in their 2-factor at some point, because we've all traveled for work. We know that, when we log in a hotel, suddenly all of our 2-factor stuff pops up. So I try to log into her VPN and I just spam her with 2-factor, because eventually she's going to get mad and she's just going to push the accept button, or, on her Microsoft Authenticator or whatever, and let me in. Now I'm connected via VPN. As far as everybody knows, it's her, and no UBA or anything's going to hop up because she's on the road. So I've configured things to watch for her to be on the road. Anyway, so now I own this environment because I can get back in anytime I want as Snoopy. Now there's a 2 in 10 chance this isn't going to work, because right now I am taxing the resources of this system, but I'm going to do a little demonstration here. So this is Charlie Brown. We are going to log out of being Charlie. That could have been interesting if I shut the thing down. That's an easy end to the demo, I suppose. Prove I caught the flag here. There we go. I am now logging into this laptop, and we're not going to sit here and watch it do the setting up Windows for me thing. But I'm just doing this as proof of win, proof that I got the flag. All right, with that, I'm going to stop presenting. Well, actually, does anybody have any questions that I'm going to need to have my screen shared in order to answer?
It's gone quiet. I think you scared everyone.
Okay, I see a few questions in the chat here. Oh yeah, I see John here put about not having you reboot by default if there's a threat. So that number one, that assumes the user knows they're a threat, which Charlie would have had to do some major work to understand there's a threat here. The number two part of that is that totally is good practice, because technically speaking, your computer is a crime scene. And if you restart your computer, you have destroyed what was in the memory, and therefore you have tampered with the evidence at a crime scene. So that's a good policy to have from a forensics perspective, but I think there's a balance there too, which is that in times of duress, people will default to what they know. So you could get somebody, try to give them a new procedure and say, unplug the network, disconnect from the Wi-Fi, and call somebody. But their first instinct, just because if we are humans, the first instinct is going to be, crap, turn it off. And in some ways, crap, turn it off. In a situation where it's not a serious event, there hasn't been much lateral movement. Yes, you've destroyed evidence, but you've also mitigated the attack. And when people get stressed out, they're going to be less likely to remember things like, okay, leave my laptop alone, unplug it from, or go over to my next door neighbor and say, hey, can you send a message to so and so for me? You need to operate on people's instincts. James, always disable fast startup. Exactly, very smart thing to do. Are these things patchable? So the patchability, the Windows, the file format Office Word there I did, that is something that's been patched out of later versions of Word. However, there are equivalents in the newer versions of Word. I just kind of like in the story of David and Goliath, David is offered Saul's armor. He says, no, I can't use it because I haven't tested it. It just goes out against Goliath without armor. I only like to use things I've tested. So I have tested this and I've done this demo reliably a few times. Metasploit is constantly updated. In fact, if you look at some, I don't think the official CVEs and NVD does it anymore, but if you look at some vendors, say you look at FortiGuard Labs, or say you look at Juniper's InfoStream or something like that, it'll say this is is in Metasploit yes, or isn't Metasploit no, because the maintainers, Metasploit's a freely maintained thing on GitHub. At the same time, though, people know the importance of it. So when a new proof of concept is released for an exploit, the new proof of concept is usually found by the people maintaining Metasploit and put in there. The version I have one that only has hacks back to like, I don't know, 2017 or something like that, and it's got 1,400 exploits in it, as well as various other things. So it's updated relatively quickly. GitHub, oh, that's cool. Repeat how I got to domain admin. Absolutely. So that was over here in the wrong tab. That was over here in the Kali tab. Oh, hey, you asked about that session. Yeah, my sessions died because I logged out and logged back in. I didn't have any kind of persistence set up there. So the way I got domain admin status, once I had the second exploit done here, the UAC bypass, this was a get system command that I totally always just, it's one of those things that's worked and it's been working for so long. I never thought about what it's actually doing in the background. It's what are the 6 ways? Mitch, do you want to look up
Yeah, I'll put it in.
Put that in there, because there's a nice write-up on it. I can picture it in my brain. I'd have to search to find it. There's 6 techniques it tries. Well, it's 3 techniques tried 2 different ways, and there's no description what each of them do. I'll let Mitch drop that link in there. Basically, though, once we are an admin, our password is being stored locally. So I can just dump it back out. And the security for the dumping back out was the hashing. But like I said, with John the Ripper, it's relatively easy to unhash things.
Yeah, I think my impression of it was, check me if I'm wrong here, Weir, is that you got on a system, you got administrative privileges, you did a hash dump of all the accounts on the system, saw an administrator account, which is assumed to be a domain admin, and then you cracked its password and then used that to get to the domain controller, which gave you everything.
Exactly, right on target there. That's a good summary, because like I almost forgot what my own key was. The key is people think of, when they think of phishing, they think of credential theft. They think of, we need data loss prevention or something along those lines. We need to educate people not to go to the fake Facebook. I didn't ever have Peppermint Patty's password. I never had Charlie Brown's password. I never had the admin's password until I got it at the end here. So I didn't use a lot of the things that people are taught in these security awareness trainings to protect against. I used, I guess I would call them traditional techniques to get to a modern goal, because obviously credentials are the modern gold mine to get the keys to the kingdom.
Well, and also the vector you use bypassed MFA because they already did it. You're
Right.
just using their authentication and then just increasing their rights to get to the information you need. And I will say Mavenspire does cyber risk assessments all the time where people are constantly amazed at two things. One, that the tools we use can bypass their existing EDRs and still do like actual evil. And then two, the idea that things are so persistent on a machine that if anybody with admin rights has ever logged into a machine, you can use that to backtrack, get the password, and get the rest of the world.
Rick, I'm going to transition that to you by throwing up your couple of slides. So
Yeah,
Rick,
sure.
what's our solution?
Yeah, our solution is that there's not one magical security tool or maybe just a couple security tools that are going to be enough to protect your network. You know, as we see that attackers use a lot of tactics, techniques, and procedures. Also, most likely your attack surface has really expanded with migration to the cloud, more robust work from home policies and so forth. So there's a lot more indicators of compromise nowadays than there was perhaps maybe a few years ago. So we need to have multiple layers of security together with, once again, the people in place to work those security tools and the processes to be able to mitigate threats. And with that, if you have the means, it's really good to escalate your security posture by utilizing threat detection and response tools. One would be XDR, which is perfect for organizations looking to take detection past their endpoint, where it provides a unified platform that integrates additional security tools for more contextualized data and alerts. And that can be used, XDR can be used for companies that maybe aren't in the market for a SIM, or if they do have a SIM, that can be used with a SIM to provide additional context. For example, if a user clicks on a phishing email that has malware that literally hides from the EDR, so it knows when the EDR is detecting it and waits for the EDR to not look before it performs its operations and bypasses that security tool, the XDR might not be able to pull in logs from your Office 365 or maybe your Active Directory, or if you have a SIM, it's going to pull in all that information and provide further context to see who else received that email, who else clicked on that file, where has that malware moved through your network, what are the lateral movements. And also, with that being said, it's good to be proactive in terms of processes, to have penetration tests completed, see where your weak points are at, look at tabletop exercises to see how you respond if an attack actually happens. And also, if you can't afford a SIM or you're not in the market for a SIM, it's good to work with a partner such as Mavenspire to make sure that you're protected and you have the 24/7 visibility into your logs. And, which is basically every event, all actions that are taken on the network or endpoints that are being collected, looking at flow data. So all the communications between hosts, and be able to correlate and normalize all that information into a dashboard that's going to give you a good visibility into your security posture, looking at real-time alerting, being able to generate reports, looking at behavioral analytics for insider threats. And then the next step from there is to look through in terms of reacting to different threats. So a SOAR, security orchestration automation response tool, is very vital, where it's going to pull in incidents from the SIM. And it's really going to help your security team focus on incident response. It's going to provide automation in terms of the tasks that accumulate your playbooks to be able to respond. For example, with the phishing email that I mentioned earlier, where it'll automatically provide playbooks and tasks to be able to contain that particular endpoint and bring in other teams, for example, for cyber resiliency. If the actor is able to pivot to one of your databases with sensitive information, you can actually create playbooks that are going to work outside the security team and bring in maybe your DBA administrator to complete some of the tasks if they are manual. Looks like we're pretty much at the top of the hour here.
Yeah, I got two things I'd like to throw in while you were talking, because I like to hear my own voice. But there was actually an alternative start I was going to do to this to avoid the phishing email, because so many people have email protection. And that is that I was going to assume I had a little foothold in the environment already in a public-facing FTP server, and put my file on that FTP server, and then send an email to Charlie that has a link that, when clicked, will download that file. So the phishing server is not going to catch that link, because that links to an internal resource, which is normal behavior. Also, specifically, one thing I was going to mention is that the specific attack vector we use there in elevating the privileges, I should say what we use is the end goal there. There is protection against that if you got a modern IAM suite like Okta or Entra that can require an admin password other than the admin that's on there to elevate the privileges. So don't think that everything's lost, even if it does get to that point. That's just that's the defense in depth thing, to making sure you have one layer of protection to protect in case that one fails, and next one fails, and next one fails, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All right, now I'll stop listening to my own voice.
All right, this is Chris Landers. I'll do a quick closeout. So just a couple of final thoughts as far as call to action. Obviously, there was a lot here. If you need to have a conversation with us individually, you can reach out to Mavenspire. There was a lot of reference earlier to things like EDR and XDR tools are only as good as how much fine tuning's been done after you initially deploy them, and that's kind of where the gaps start to show. So if you're needing help and assistance with trying to figure out what your security posture looks like, you want us to take a look and do some advisory, get an existing tool performing the way it should be, get a new tool in place to fill in the gaps, we're happy to have those types of conversations